At sunrise, Mei Zhang drew a doorway on the side of a mountain. Not on a wall, not on a frame. On raw dirt and stone, she pressed a piece of chalk against the slope above Red Alder Gulch and marked a straight white line down the bank. Then another, then a low cross line across the top. As if she were measuring the entrance to a house nobody else could see. Below her, the settlement had just begun to wake. Smoke lifted from plank cabins. Mules stamped near the freight shed. A wagon wheel groaned in the cold mud. Then Mei raised her pick. The first blow rang across the valley. Stone answered iron with a hard, bright crack. Men turned from the hitching rail. A woman carrying wash stopped in the street. Two boys outside the mercantile stood perfectly still, watching the Chinese widow carve a door into the earth. Mei did not look down. She struck again and again. By midday, the chalk doorway had become a wound in the hill. Loose shale slid around her boots. Her dark braid had come undone. Dust streaked the sweat on her face. She wore her husband's old canvas coat, the sleeves tied at the wrist with cord, because the cuffs were too wide for her hands. People had already begun climbing the road just to stare. By afternoon, Caleb Harlan came himself. Harlan owned the largest store in Red Alder Gulch, and believed that gave him a right to explain the world to everyone inside it. He reached the slope, breathing hard, boots sinking in the loosened earth. Mei kept working until his shadow fell across her hands. "What are you cutting into my view for?" he asked. Mei set the pick down and wiped grit from her cheek. "A room." Harlan looked at the dark notch in the hill. Then he laughed once, without kindness. "That is not a room. That is where people put the dead." Mei picked up a flat stone, turned it in her palm, and placed it carefully beside three others. "A grave closes," she said. "This opens." The answer bothered him more than silence would have. Down below, someone laughed loud enough for the hill to hear. Harlan pointed toward the cabins. "A proper house stands where sunlight can reach all four walls." Mei's eyes moved over the roofs below. Thin walls, tall chimneys, porches already sagging from last year's snow. "My last proper house froze from all four sides," she said. Harlan's mouth tightened. Everyone in town knew her husband. Wen had died that winter. Some said fever took him. Some said bad luck. Some said the mountain was no place for people who came from somewhere else. Mei had heard all of it. She lifted the pick again. Harlan stepped back as the metal struck stone. By evening, the story had changed shape before it reached the saloon. The widow was digging a tomb. The widow had lost her mind. The widow was trying to live like an animal in a burrow. Mei heard the words every time the wind carried voices uphill, but she also heard something else. Water under the ground. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a faint, constant whisper where snowmelt seeped through seams in the slope. That was why she had chosen the place. That night, she lit one small lamp inside the cut she had made. The flame trembled against stone ribs showing through the dirt. Mei unrolled a length of red oilcloth across her knees. Inside it were Wen's plans. Not a book. Not clean drawings made for pride. A working man's record. Charcoal lines. Smudged numbers. A corner stained with lamp oil. Notes written in English, Cantonese, and rough symbols he had learned from miners, ditch diggers, and stonecutters across the mountains. Do not stop water. Give it a road. Mei ran one finger over the line. Wen had spent 20 years building things other men walked over without seeing. Mine drains, stone culverts, oven flues, irrigation cuts, retaining walls that held after the cheap ones failed. He used to tell her that water was never lazy. It only looked gentle when it had already found where to go. So Mei built the house for that truth. First, she cut back the hill until the raw stone showed. Then she dug a trench around the future walls, deeper than her knees, sloping it toward a hidden outlet below the pines. She filled it with rounded river cobbles. She hauled one cartload at a time from the creek. Over the stones, she packed brush, gravel, and clay in careful layers. Children came to watch. One boy asked, Why bury rocks where no one can see them? Mei pushed another cobble into the trench. So the water sees them first. The boy frowned. Water cannot see. It does not need eyes to find a road. By September, the doorway had grown into a low chamber inside the hill. Mei set stone cheeks on both sides of the entrance and wedged cedar beams above them. She shaped the roof low and heavy, not flat like the valley cabins, but curved into the slope so wind would pass over instead of tearing at it. Nothing looked pretty. Everything had a job. The floor rose slightly toward the back wall. The side trench carried seepage away. The roof held a skin of clay, then bark, then grass sod cut from the ridge. Every stone was chosen by weight, face, and edge. When the preacher visited, he stood outside the doorway and refused to step in. God put people in the open air, he said. Mei was sealing a gap between stones with clay. Seeds sleep under earth, she answered. We are not seeds. No, she said. Seeds know when to wait. He left with that sentence still on his face. The cold came early that year. By late October, frost silvered the wagon tongues every morning. By November, the creek froze in the slow bends. Men chopped wood until their shoulders shook. Women shoved rags into wall cracks and still woke to ice inside the windows. Mei burned 1 armload of wood every 2 nights. That was the first thing nobody could explain from town. Her chimney gave only a thin line of smoke. Some nights, almost none at all. Yet each morning she walked out without blue hands, without cracked lips, without the stiff, hollow look winter gave everyone else. Harlan noticed because he counted everything. He counted flour barrels, nails, kerosene tins, debt, and wood. One gray morning, after feeding half a cord into his own stove before breakfast, he climbed to Mei's hillside with his coat collar pulled high. She opened the door before he knocked. Warmth touched him, not the harsh slap of a roaring fire, not smoke heat, not the kind that scorched one side of your body while the other stayed cold. This was even quiet. It came from the walls, the floor, the long stone bench beside the stove. Harlan stepped in despite himself. The chamber was small, but it did not feel buried. A glass bottle caught morning light near the door. Dried herbs hung from a beam. A narrow back vent breathed clean air through the room. The stove itself was barely alive. A thumb-sized flame moved behind the iron door. Harlan stared at it. That cannot warm this place. No, Mei said. It only starts the warmth. She pointed to the flue pipe. It did not rise straight out like every other chimney in the settlement. It bent sideways, disappeared through the clay. Packed stone bench turned once behind the wall, and only then climbed out through the roof. The smoke walks before it leaves, Mei said. Harlan touched the bench. His hand stopped. The stone was warm all the way through. It felt less like sitting by a fire and more like leaning against summer held inside rock. He snatched his hand away as if the bench had accused him. You copied this from someone, he muttered. My husband built camp ovens for men who never learned his name. That is not an answer. It is the answer. Harlan looked around again. Dry corners, no smoke stain, no draft crawling across the floor. Then he saw the red oilcloth plans tucked under a stone weight near the wall. For 1 second, Mayday thought he might ask about them. Instead, he said, "You were lucky with the hill." Mei closed the stove door. The hill was always here. Harlan left, but the town changed after that. Not openly, no one apologized. No one admitted curiosity. But by December, people found reasons to climb the slope. A woman came asking to borrow a needle. A miner came asking whether Messi had extra lamp oil. 2 boys brought a broken sled and stayed long enough to press their backs against the warm bench. They all left with the same uneasy silence, because the house they mocked had become the only warm room in Red Alder Gulch that did not eat wood like a furnace. Then the mountain began storing danger. Snow fell before Christmas and did not leave. It stacked in the high timber. It rounded the ridge lines. It pressed pine branches to the ground until they split in the night with sounds like rifle cracks. Old Ezra Pike, who had trapped those mountains for 30 years, stood outside Harlan's store in February and stared at the peaks. "Too much white up there," he said. Harlan shrugged. "Snow melts every spring." Ezra did not look away from the ridge. Not all at once. It shouldn't. Mei heard him. She had already been watching. In the mornings, she pressed her palm against the ditch stones near her doorway and felt the hidden trickle strengthen. At dusk, she walked the slope below the house and cleared pine needles from the outlet where the trench emptied. When ice formed there, she broke it with the handle of her spade. People saw and laughed again. Now the widow was sweeping water that had not come. In March the weather turned wrong. The air warmed too fast. Snow slumped from roofs in heavy sheets. The creek turned the color of old coffee. Every day it climbed higher against the banks, carrying twigs first, then branches, then whole deadfall logs that slammed against the bridge pilings. Mei opened a second spill trench above the house. Harlan found her there in a wet wind, digging through half-frozen mud. "You already live in a hole," he said. "Now you are digging another?" Mei did not stop. "The first road is for small water? And that for angry water?" He looked down at the valley where his store, his barn, and his house stood in a neat line beside the creek road. "You think water will climb this high?" Mei drove the spade into mud and looked at the black clouds dragging over the ridge. "No," she said. "I think people built too low." That answer traveled through town faster than any warning. By supper, half the valley had heard that Mei Zhang believed everyone should move uphill because mud frightened her. The rain began after midnight, cold, dense, endless. For 2 days it soaked the snowpack and beat the road into paste. Cabin roofs leaked brown water, cellars filled. Livestock stood bawling in flooded pens. Men laid boards across their floors and walked on them like docks. Mei's house stayed dry. The upper spill trench caught runoff before it reached the roof. The side drain carried seepage under the cobbles. The low sod roof shed rain without lifting in the wind. Inside, the stove burned small and steady outside. Red Alder Creek forgot its banks. On the third night, the bridge went first. Not all at once. There was a crack like a tree giving way. Then a groan. Then another crack. Deeper men ran with lanterns, shouting over the water. The bridge deck twisted, held for one impossible breath, and vanished into the dark current. After that, the valley lost its shape. Water spread through the lower cabins. It lifted barrels from porches. It took fences whole. It spun wagon wheels through yards like toys. Harlan stayed in his store until the front window burst. By then, the creek was no longer a creek. It was a moving wall full of timber. He dragged his wife, Ruth, out through the back with their youngest child wrapped in a quilt. His older son, held the mule rope until the mule screamed and the rope tore from his hands. They ran uphill because there was nowhere else left. Halfway up, Ruth fell. The mud took one shoe, then nearly took her knee. Deep, Harlan pulled her free. Behind them, something large smashed into his store. The sound was not just wood breaking. It was a life being erased. Above them, a lantern appeared in the rain. Mei stood at her open doorway. She did not call out. She did not waste breath. She came down the last stretch of slope with a rope around her waist and tied it around a pine trunk. Then she reached Harlan's family one by one. The child first, then Ruth, then the boy. Harlan last. When he crossed the threshold, he stopped as if he had stepped into another season. The room was warm, dry. The little flame in the stove moved behind iron. The stone bench radiated heat into the soaked bodies collapsing around it. Rain thundered on the sod roof, but inside the sound was dulled by earth and stone, pushed far away like a storm happening in another world. Harlan turned back toward the door. His store was gone. His house was gone. The street where he had stood every morning and judged other people had disappeared beneath black water. Mei handed Ruth a wool blanket. Harlan tried to speak, but no word came with enough strength to stand. More people reached the hill before dawn. Ezra Pike arrived with blood running down one side of his face. The Miller girls came barefoot, carrying their baby brother between them. A teamster crawled through the doorway with one arm hanging uselessly. Then the preacher came, soaked to the skin, shaking so hard he could not unbutton his coat. Mei opened the door every time. By sunrise, 16 people were inside the house. The town had called a grave. Children slept shoulder to shoulder beside the warm bench. Wet coats steamed from pegs. Ruth warmed her hands around a cup of broth and kept staring at the ceiling, waiting for water to come through. It never did. Harlan sat near the doorway, watching the floor. At first, Mei thought he was looking at his boots. Then she realized he was listening. Under the storm, under the voices, under the breath of sleeping children. There was a sound beneath the stones, a steady rush. Water moving where Mei had told it to move. Harlan looked at her. You knew this would happen. Mei lowered the ladle into the pot. I knew what water does when men pretend ground is flat. Outside, a building cracked apart somewhere below. The sound moved through the earth and into the soles of everyone's feet. No one laughed. Near noon, the rain thinned. The door opened to a valley nobody recognized. Mud covered the road. The bridge was gone. Cabins lay broken open, their rooms exposed like boxes kicked apart by a boot. The church had shifted from its foundation and leaned into a cottonwood, bell silent, door missing. Harlan walked downhill until the mud reached his shins. Where his store had stood, there was a pit of brown water and splintered boards. For a long time he said nothing. When he climbed back to Mei's house, the others were gathered around the entrance. Their eyes moved over the roof, the doorway, the stone cheeks, the trench outlet still pouring muddy water away from the foundation. They were not looking at a strange hole anymore. They were looking at a thing that had understood the disaster before they did. Harlan removed his hat. His hair was plastered flat to his head. His face looked older than it had the day before. Show us, he said. Mei stood in the doorway with the red oilcloth roll under one arm. The words could have meant many things. Show us how to build, show us where to dig, show us what we refuse to see. She stepped outside and unrolled Wen's plans on a flat stone. The paper darkened at the edges from the wet air, but the lines remained. Drain first, wall second, roof low, fire slow, water always given a road. Mei pointed to each part, not quickly, not proudly, but with the patience of someone naming bones in a body. People leaned closer. The preacher knelt in the mud to see. Harlan touched the trench stones with 2 fingers. Water rushed cold beneath them, invisible until his hand found it. All this was under our feet, he said. Mei looked down at the ruined valley. It is always under our feet. Rebuilding did not begin with hammers. It began with listening. Men who once laughed at Mei now followed her along the hillside while she marked safe ground with stakes. Women sorted stones by face and weight because Mei showed them which ones locked best. Children carried gravel in aprons. Ezra cut cedar beams from wind-fallen trees. Harlan used the boards he could salvage from his store to make doors for other families before his own. The new houses did not stand in a proud line beside the creek. They tucked into the slope. Each one had a drain trench before it had walls. Each roof bent low beneath sod. Each stove sent its pipe through stone before giving smoke to the sky. By winter, warm windows glowed from the hillside like embers set into the earth. Years passed. Travelers still came through Red Alder Gulch and slowed their horses when they saw the homes built into the mountain. Some called them strange. Some called them poor. Some laughed until spring storms came, and the creek below rose brown and violent, clawing through the old road while the hillside houses remained still. On those nights, Mei would sit beside the stone bench and add one small log to the stove. The fire would catch, the smoke would walk its long road, the stones would hold the heat, and outside, the water would take the road she had given it. The hill had never been a grave, it had been a shield, and the woman they called Buried was the one who taught the valley how to survive.